When I was first learning about investing, I was confused why some funds seemed to have two versions, one labelled Acc and the other labelled Dist. So I'm going to explain what these things mean, why both versions exist, and how to work out which one you should pick. You can find a lot of funds with both distributing and accumulating share classes. One example is the really popular Vanguard FTSE All-World UCITS ETF with the symbol VWRL, and that's the income version or the distributing version. There's also VWRP, which is the accumulating version of that fund. So what's the difference? Basically, it's how they distribute dividends. When the fund pays a dividend, the Dist version will pay out that dividend to you as cash, which you can then do whatever you like with. Whereas the Acc version will reinvest those dividends automatically, buying more shares and growing your investment. If you were to manually reinvest the dividends from a distributing share class, the performance should look exactly the same as the accumulating share class, which you can see if we compare the two versions of this Vanguard ETF next to each other. So what's the reason for this? Why are there two different share classes? Well, most funds available to us in the UK are also available across Europe. But many European countries have a tax advantage when it comes to ETF dividends. In countries like Belgium, Portugal, Italy, France or Poland, as well as others, you only owe tax on dividends you actually receive. If your dividends are automatically reinvested, like they are with an accumulating fund, taxes on those dividends are deferred until you sell your shares, at which point you would owe capital gains tax instead. So for investors in those countries, it generally makes sense to choose an accumulating fund over a distributing one, as they can lower their tax that way. But for us in the UK, we're taxed in the year the dividend was paid, regardless of whether we physically received it or not, so we don't have this advantage. So given that, does it matter which one you pick as a UK investor? Actually, yes, it still does, but the choice is a bit more complicated. There are two questions you can ask yourself to help you decide. Firstly, are you in or near retirement? So in other words, do you want to receive regular dividend payments that you can actually spend? If yes, then a distributing share class might be better. This means you'll receive the dividends automatically without having to sell any shares. If no, and you're just trying to grow your investment for the future, then you need to ask another question. And that is, are you investing in a tax-sheltered account like an ISA? If yes, then accumulating may be better, because dividends here will be automatically reinvested for you without you having to do anything. If you're investing outside of a tax-sheltered account, then you can choose either, but distributing might be administratively simpler, as you will still have to report dividends on your tax return either way, assuming the amount is above your dividend allowance, of course. If you choose accumulating, you have to make sure you can accurately report on dividends you didn't physically receive, and you'll also need to come up with cash from elsewhere to pay any taxes you owe on those dividends. Even if you're currently receiving dividends below the annual allowance, bear in mind that this might not always be the case as your investment grows. Aside from the tax reporting, another reason to get this decision right is to avoid overpaying transaction fees to your broker. If you're near retirement or already retired, you could avoid transaction fees with a distributing fund, as dividends would be paid out automatically, whereas with an accumulating fund, you would have to sell shares and potentially pay a transaction fee every time you want to withdraw money. On the other hand, if you want to reinvest all of your dividends, an accumulating fund could allow you to avoid those transaction fees, as the reinvesting would happen on the fund side and not through your broker. If you had a distributing fund, you'd have to buy new shares manually and potentially pay a transaction fee every time you received a dividend. To explain this a bit better, let's consider two different example UK investors, Emily and James, each with different financial situations. Emily is a 30-year-old professional who's just started her career. She's ambitious and focused on building long-term wealth. She isn't near retirement and she's investing for the future, primarily in an ISA. By going for accumulating funds, any dividends she receives will be automatically reinvested, boosting the growth potential of her portfolio over time. She also won't have to worry about transaction fees, is she doesn't need to make any transactions to reinvest her dividends, and this aligns perfectly with her goal of long-term wealth accumulation. James, on the other hand, is 65 years old and is just retired. He's also recently received a £500,000 inheritance, and he wants to use that money to generate a steady source of income to support him in his retirement. Because he's received a large amount of cash as a lump sum, he can't put it all into a tax-advantaged account. So in this scenario, investing it using distributing funds would be more suitable. This way, he can receive the regular dividend payments as cash that he can spend without needing to sell shares or worry about transaction fees. So you can see how both types of fund can be useful to different types of investors in the UK. The distributing share class is a clear winner when it comes to retirement. So what if you don't want to receive dividends yet, but will do at some point in the future, when you retire, for example? You might be wondering if you could switch to a distributing fund then, and the answer is maybe. Although they might be part of the same fund, distributing and accumulating share classes are still considered different securities. And this means selling your investments in an accumulating share class and rebuying the distributing version will create a tax event and potential capital gains tax to pay. Of course, if all your investment is in a tax shelter like an ISA, this problem goes away, but it's just something to be aware of.